Hi everyone, I'm here today with a video for First Language English for narrative writing. And I've got something really exciting today because I've actually got a real piece of student work from one of my former pupils, shared with permission of course by both him and his parents, because I feel like often I'm sharing with you guys stories that I've written, and I'm no Charles Dickens, but I am a 31-year-old woman with a literature degree, right? So it's sometimes like not really realistic for what you need to do for a top mark A star. Like, it's sometimes a little bit more than you need to do. So I thought it would be good to show you guys a realistic example of an A-star student's piece of work and hopefully inspire you for your own narratives. So the focus for this lesson is of course narrative writing, but specifically the reason why this student scored so highly was because he used a circular structure and he embedded deliberate clues within his story so that his climax had payoff. It felt realistic, it didn't feel random. So those are the things that I'm really going to focus on as we go through this exemplar piece of work. Before we get to the exemplar, don't forget that if you want to find more like this, you can head over to my website taughtly.co.uk, where there's more free video lessons, worksheets, resources, etc. for you. And don't forget that I do also offer tutoring for one-to-one, small group classes, First Language Revision Masterclass coming up in March 2025, a link is in the description. There's also first language courses on there, both free and paid for, and if you're a teacher you can find teaching resources on my website too. If you watched my video on the Major's Apprentice, then this slide will be familiar to you. But a reminder, what is a short story, right? Because whether you're doing coursework or whether you're doing paper 2 exam, you have to write a short story, and the clue is in the name, short, right? So a short story is characterised by its singularity. Singularity coming from singular, meaning one. So there will be a single dominant character who is confronted with a singular dominant problem for which there is a single dominant outcome. So you're not trying to overcomplicate it. You're not trying to tell Harry Potter, right? You have got one main character who's got one main problem which is fixed in some way by the end of the story. And if you try to do more than that, then your story is not going to be doable well, and it will not be short either. Now, in terms of how you're marked, you get 2 different marks for narrative writing. So you're going to get content and structure, and also style and accuracy. Now, content and structure is basically how clear is your plot, how good is your characterization, how well structured is your story interesting, realistic, does it pay off, does it have a great climax? So basically, is your story good? That's content and structure. Now, if we're looking in the top band over here, you can see that your story will be complex. The plot will be well defined and strongly developed with description, character, setting, and effective climax, and you will be making choices for deliberate effect. Well, if we boil that down, what does that even mean? So if your plot is well defined, that means that you are following plot mountain with an introduction, rise in tension, a climax, and you might end there if you're going to have a cliffhanger, but you could also have a resolution. You'll also need to have some description of both setting and character and little details about your story that bring the world to life. You'll have characters who feel real. So many times I see stories where the main character is just I, right? First person I. And I'm like, who is I? Because the student never tells me. So it could be an old man, old woman, teenager. No idea who this protagonist of your story is. No idea what their name is, what they look like, what they care about. So you must have a character that feels real and is developed. A setting. So not just like generically could be set anywhere. Why not Tokyo in the 1950s? Why not Beijing in 2025? Why not Manchester at Christmas time? So you need to get really specific with your setting, thinking both when and where your story is set. You'll have an effective climax, so your story will actually be building up towards something. And part of what makes that climax effective is by hiding those little clues and mystery and tension throughout your story, so that when your climax happens, it's like, wow, that's surprising and exciting, but it also doesn't feel like sudden and random because there are little subtle hidden clues throughout your story. And generally, if I can boil down, content and structure into one thing, what I always look out for whenever I examine these questions is, have you made some choices for deliberate effect? And in fact, in the top band, it will be that all of your choices have been done for deliberate effect. So it doesn't feel like you've just got into the exam hall and gone, I need to write a story, and then you've just written down the first thing that comes to your mind. But it actually feels like at the start of your story, you already know where your ending is going to go. You already know what your tension is building towards. And everything that you're doing is deliberate, purposeful, building towards that final moment in your story. And this is what having that circular structure can help with. The story that we're going to look at today has a circular structure where we start and end in a very similar kind of way. And that shows the examiner that you are making choices for deliberate effect, because from your very, very first paragraph, you knew that you were going to reuse some of those details in your final paragraph. Therefore, surely everything that you've done has been for that deliberate effect, which is a feature of top band writing. For style and accuracy, so this is basically a writing mark. If you want to be in the top band, you need to be consistently accurate. Look, you can have a few small errors. No one's asking for complete and utter perfection, but 95% of the time it should be accurate. And when you're making mistakes, that should be with more complex sentence structures or vocabulary, rather than like simple basic mistakes. So in the top band, we're looking for precise and effective vocabulary. So not just like really high level vocabulary, but vocabulary used well in its context. There's no point putting very, very complicated vocabulary in there if you're using it incorrectly. So I would rather see the best word choice for that moment than the most advanced and sophisticated word choice for that moment if it's not quite right for the sentence. For sentences, we are of course looking for a range of different sentence structures, so making sure that your sentences vary in terms of their lengths, their grammatical constructions and their openings. I do notice a lot of students often start their sentences in very similar ways, like I, or the, right? So you're trying to avoid anything that's repetitive in terms of language. And we are looking for your grammar to be almost always accurate. So we're going to have a look now at the student example, and it's called the elevator. Now, as we read through it, do keep these questions in your mind, thinking about how it's meeting the following criteria for content, structure, style, and accuracy. So for content, has it got an engaging plot? Does it have features of narrative writing like characterization, description, dialogue, and setting? For structure, does it have correct paragraphing? Is the plot coherent? Does it build logically towards an effective climax, or does it feel kind of random? Do notice for our A-star skills, a circular structure. How does it start and end in a very similar way? And also the climax has got clues hidden throughout. So do keep an eye out for those clues towards the climax. I'm not going to go into that too much right now because I don't want to spoil the story for you by telling you exactly what you should be looking out for there, but you'll know them when you see them. For style, we're looking at, has the student got sophisticated vocabulary used correctly? A variety of punctuation, a variety of sentence lengths, openings and constructions. And does it sound like a story, or does it sound like an encyclopedia article, right? And for accuracy, of course, just looking out, does it have accurate spelling, punctuation and grammar? So this is the elevator by one of my previous students. Actually, he's still a current student. He's in one of my group classes. Okay, let's start, and don't forget this introduction. We're going to see something very similar to it at the end for that circular structure, so pay close attention, especially here. The elevator. There was an efficient hum of activity in the hotel lobby of the New York hotel that day. Men in expensive suits, women in designer dresses, and the staff in smart uniforms were all going about their business. The scene was reminiscent of the days of old. Art Deco architecture, heavy carpeting, brass fixtures and crystal lamps, luxurious surroundings at their finest. Suddenly, a young girl raced through, her hair flying wildly behind her as she ran through. Sylvia was late. She was in New York City visiting her parents. Her father, the famous architect William Rose, was a rather wrinkled figure, with bluish-grey eyes. There was an odd sadness in his gaze, despite the fact he was accepting an International Architecture Award that night. Sylvia ran to the elevators, not stopping to notice the ornate fixtures and the hotel's sophisticated design. She flew into an elevator. Strangely, there was a bellman inside. "What floor, miss?" asked the old man. Then, noticing the man, "Oh, 30th floor, please." Sylvia was silent now, except for her heavy breathing. She noticed the old man again. He had a drooping shoulder and an odd sadness buried beneath those icy-like blue eyes. "I've never been in an elevator with an operator inside. Are all elevators like this?" she asked. "No, miss. This is the last one," said the old man. "Years ago, when she was new, all the elevators in the Grand Hotel were like this one. It was the fanciest hotel in all of New York City, you know." Sylvia looked away. Just when she was about to say something, the elevator suddenly came to a stop with the chime of a bell. "Gosh, what's wrong?" she said, fear evident on her face. "Oh, this happens sometimes," said the elevator man. "No need to panic, miss. I'll just make a call." He reached down to the box near the floor that held a phone. His sleeve came up his arm as he reached. That's when Sylvia noticed the numbers. There, tattooed on his arm, were 5 faded numbers, clear enough to see. Sylvia froze. She knew what they meant. Her father had told her. They were the numbers that the Nazis had inked onto the arms of Jews sent to the concentration camps. Her father had escaped just before the war, but his family was left behind. Sylvia stared at the numbers on the man's arm. "Sir," she began tentatively, "I couldn't help but notice. Those numbers, the numbers on your arm." The elevator was still stopped. All was quiet except for their hushed words. The elevator man gave a slight nod, his face expressionless. Sylvia continued, "My father is also Jewish. He told me about the Jews in Germany during the war. It was so horrible." The man's eyes softened as he looked up at Sylvia. Yeah, it was a difficult time. Sylvia noticed his name tag. It read Rosenberg. The old man continued, "It was a long time ago. Our family only had money to send one of us to America. We chose my younger brother, Wilhelm. He was such a bright young boy. Always wanted to be an architect. It was his dream." His tone became more sentimental. "I took this job 50 years ago. I knew that if Wilhelm ever came to New York, he would visit the Grand Hotel. Like its name says, it's the grandest hotel in all of New York. It's won awards for its architecture, you know. And if he visited, he might just walk into my elevator. That was my dream." He paused. "I'm sorry, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Heinrich Rosenberg." For a second time, Sylvia was silent. Could it be? She knew about her uncle. His name was Henry or Heinrich or something like that. And his last name, Rosenberg. She knew her father had changed his name, as many Jews did in those days. "Excuse me, what did you say your younger brother's name was?" Sylvia asked the man. "Wilhelm Rosenberg, same as mine," pointing to his name tag. "And what happened to him? Your younger brother, I mean," Sylvia asked. "After he left for America, we never heard from him. It's been so long." A chill came over Sylvia. Just then, the elevator suddenly lurched back to life, and Sylvia's floor arrived. Thoughtfully, she glanced over at the man. "Can you hold the elevator? Please, wait just a moment." Sylvia ran to her parents' room. "Dad! Dad!" she shouted. "There's someone, a man. I think it might be... Dad, come quick!" Her father stepped out of the room and into the hallway. He wondered what his daughter was so excited about. There, before him, stood an old man, strangely familiar. The two men stared at each other for a moment, and then the years melted away. Heinrich spoke first. "Wilhelm? Is that you?" It was the younger man's turn. "Heinrich, can it be? It's you? It's really you?" The two men raced to each other and embraced for what seemed like forever. And there, on the 30th floor of the Grand Hotel in New York City, the one with the fancy artwork and the shiny wood panelling, the two men were taken back to a time long ago when the war had come to their little town in Germany and separated their family. At long last, Heinrich Rosenberg and his brother Wilhelm, now William Rose, were united at last, both their dreams suddenly and surely having come true. Oh, nice, right? Such a good story. Now, maybe you're wondering, this is very, very long, right? So this student, he wrote this story for coursework. So, you know, for first language, some students do coursework, some students do paper 2. And if you do coursework, you're allowed to write roughly 800 words. Well, he wrote 926 words, but that was absolutely fine. So, and additionally, if you do coursework, you're allowed to redraft and get feedback. So you wouldn't be expected to write something this long or this well crafted for the exam, because the grade boundaries for the exam are slightly lower. You are marked exactly the same, like by the same standard. It's just that you need a lower number, a lower mark to get a higher grade overall in exam versus coursework. Okay, so let's get stuck into it. The first thing then is we've got this lovely circular structure. So notice that elements of the first paragraph are reused in the final paragraph. So we've got the description of the hotel as having Art Deco architecture, heavy carpeting, brass fixtures and crystal lamps. And we've also got the name of the father, William Rose, which by the end of the story we realise, oh, that's Wilhelm Rosenberg. And so his name at the start leaves that clue at the end. So notice this, and the hotel lobby of New York Hotel. And then in the final paragraph, these details are reused. And there on the 30th floor of the Grand Hotel in New York City, the one with the fancy artwork and shiny wood panelling, right? So we've got these details being reused, as well as Wilhelm, now William Rose, that detail taking on a new connotation by the end of the story. Now, the main thing that this story is building towards is the realisation that the brother is the realisation that the father and the man in the elevator are actually long lost brothers. So this student has hidden many clues throughout their story so that it won't feel completely random. In fact, in their first draft, they didn't have very many clues, and that was one of the pieces of feedback that I gave them. Because imagine if you don't have clues right, it's just suddenly like, and they were brothers, ta-da! You're like, okay, sure. But if you've got the clues, then slowly throughout the story, you start to realise just before the climax, and then therefore it feels more realistic to you. So clues that the brothers are related. Firstly, obviously, we've got their names and the fact that Rose sounds so much like Rosenberg. But we do know that with the father, he's described as having an odd sadness in his gaze. And actually, the brother is described in the exact same way with the exact same wording. So that's the most obvious clue. But we've also got the colour of their eyes. The father has got bluish grey eyes, and the elevator man has got icy-like blue eyes, so they're described physically as being really similar to each other. We've also got the clue that the father is there to receive an International Architecture Award, and so then when the elevator man starts talking about, oh, I worked here because my brother is interested in architecture, we start to go, ooh, okay, is that because they're related? So where's the part with the brother? So here's the bit with the brother. He says about Wilhelm, he was a bright young boy, he always wanted to be an architect, it was his dream. And even this idea of his dream, that is brought back in the conclusion, because in the end of the story we learn that both of their dreams have suddenly and surely become true. So everything is like really nicely tied together in this circular structure. The other clues that we've got are the references to World War II and Jews. So the fact that Sylvia's father had told her what the numbers, the tattoo numbers on his arm means, that's a really big clue, because that suggests that the father knows something about that, and how could he know something about that? And also we learned that her father had to leave his family behind. So by the time we get in here, we're like, ooh, maybe they could be, but we're still not sure. Then we learn that her father was also Jewish. So therefore, okay, there's an even higher chance that these two men could be related. And we get the clue of Rosenberg and Rose, right? So they're two surnames being very, very similar to each other. Likewise, Wilhelm and William being really close to each other. This starts to become even clearer when Sylvia says that she knew that her father had changed his name. We as a reader are starting to get quite certain that these two men are related, and we're just waiting now for Sylvia to realise it and then for the men to meet. So there's all of these layers of tension of, we need to realise it as a reader, then Sylvia needs to realise it, and then we want to see the brothers meeting and realising it themselves. So many layers of tension kind of building one on top of the other. Then Sylvia starts to realise it after Heinrich says his brother had left for America, and this is when the chill comes over Sylvia and she jumps out of the elevator. Now we get to our climax of the story, and this is the two men finally meeting each other and this reunion outside of the elevator, where it says the two men stared at each other for a moment and all the years melted away. And then this builds up to this lovely circular structure and a resolution that they embraced each other for what seemed like forever, and then back to the similar words and similar descriptions of the opening. Now, in terms of having a really focused plot, we've clearly got this. We've got three characters who feel very realistic, especially the two brothers, because we've got descriptions not just of what they look like, but also what they care about, what motivates them. So for Wilhelm, that is that he's an architect, but he's still not happy. And for Henry, that's that he's an elevator operator that's been waiting for his brother all of these years. We've got the setting of New York City in a very fancy hotel, so a very specific setting. And of course, within that, beautiful description of what we can see there, such as the Art Deco architecture, heavy carpeting, brass fixtures, etc. The ornate fixtures down here too, the sophisticated design of the elevator and so on. Also notice that the dialogue is absolutely lovely, so it really sounds how people actually speak. And again, this was something that me and the student worked on. So my advice to him was, speak it out loud, and if it feels unnatural and robotic, then you need to change it for something that sounds more realistic. Because it wouldn't be like, oh, hello, you are my brother. It's so nice to see you after all these years. How are you? Right? You've got to think, what would you actually say in that moment when you're shocked and surprised and emotional? So, for example, we've got some spoken words like, oh gosh, what's wrong? Oh, this happens sometimes. No need to panic, miss. So words that you would actually say when you're speaking. But But also look, when Sylvia is trying to figure things out, we've got the use of ellipses to show the pause. So she says, I couldn't help but notice those numbers, the numbers on your arm. That's the way we actually speak, right? A little bit broken as we try to get our thoughts together. Those numbers, the numbers on your arm, and the ... there makes it feel very, very realistic. And I especially like when Sylvia is panicking and calling her dad. So notice how broken and excited her dialogue becomes. Dad, Dad, she shouted, there's someone, a man, I think he might be, Dad, come quick. So here this is really shown by, again, the punctuation of the ellipses and also the exclamation marks to show how excited she is in that moment. But the sentence structure is broken because she's just trying to get the words out and she's not really sure what to say. And that really represents how someone would actually speak in this moment of great excitement and confusion. If you have a look at the punctuation generally, it's very varied and sophisticated. So you've got elements such as dashes and all of the full stops and commas are used correctly. Sentences are very complex and always punctuated correctly, even when the sentence becomes complex. So for example, down here, this is a lovely complex sentence. So it's all of this part here, but it's all punctuated correctly. And there, comma. On the 30th floor of the Grand Hotel in New York City, dash for a little dependent clause here, the one with the fancy artwork and the shiny wood panelling. The two men were taken back to long ago when the war had come to their little town in Germany and separated their family. So a long complex sentence that's always in control and being used to create a deliberate effect, a deliberate tone of voice. Now in terms of accuracy, it is very, very accurate the whole way through. But apart from some words repeating each other, the spelling, punctuation and grammar was absolutely beautiful. So if you're wondering what mark this story got, well, it was for coursework, but I can translate it into exam for you. So for content and structure, it got 16 out of 16 full marks, and for style and accuracy, it lost just 1 mark for some repetitive vocabulary, getting 23 out of 24. So essentially an almost perfect story. I asked the student to share a few words with what inspired him to write this story, and also how he worked through that redrafting process. So I asked him, what inspired you to write this story? And he said, my context-based interest in world history and architecture has brought me to the inspiration towards the written coursework, because of course he was doing coursework, not exam. Especially of which the historical context of the 1930s to 50s, a golden age for both historical events and where ideation has led to many of the typical features of architecture we think of now. So he's quite interested in architecture, the Art Deco design, but also like the history of World War II. Therefore, I thought it would be interesting to expand on the post-World War II narrative, where I explore the perspectives of both sides, so of people that brought away and evacuated versus people that are left behind, and how they all contribute to a shared value or belief. So like some advice that you could take from that is write about what you know, write about what you're passionate in. If you are a history student, why not get inspired by history? If you really like fantasy, why not write a fantasy story? So if you pick something you actually care about and that you know lots of details with, that you can make feel realistic because you're an expert in it, then that's something that I think will be a really good starting point for a narrative. For this student, again, I was his teacher and I gave him some advice in between his drafts. So I said to him, can you remember, and he could, what feedback I gave you to improve your story before this final draft? So he said that I told him to integrate some small hints and foreshadowing of the brothers' physical attributes, such as blue eyes, that they might be related to each other. So we needed those clues dotted the whole way through so that the climax was effective. And I also said to him, fix the dialogue structure. Some of his punctuation wasn't quite right with that. And make sure that the dialogue is the right level of formality. Sometimes some lines were too formal, but very much redrafted that beautifully by his final piece of work that we've just read. My final tips and reminders for narrative writing then. Clarity. Make sure that your story is clear. I need to understand literally what's happening. If your friend read your story, would they be able to summarise the literal events? Character. Do you have at least 2 characters who are named and described? Don't just have first person I, give them a name. Setting. When and where is your story set? How are you going to describe that? Climax. What is your story building to? What will the peak of your story mountain be? In fact, can you even have that circular structure so that the start and end of your story end in very similar ways, making that climax feel all the more effective? Add tension. There should be some unanswered question in your story that will keep your reader engaged, adding in those little clues and mystery to build the tension towards your climax. Don't forget to spend some time at the end of your exam checking for spelling, punctuation and grammar. You should be proofreading your work. If you're doing coursework or if you're typing up, you can Grammarly check. If you're doing an exam, you should use at least 5 or 10 minutes at the end to go back through your work. I hope that this video lesson was useful to you, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Don't forget that you can find more like this on my website, that's taughtly.co.uk. And if you would like to have some tutoring with me, I offer one-to-one self-formed group classes, and I've got my masterclass coming up in March and April 2025. There's details below, but basically it will be 2 live lessons a week for 2 months, and every single week I will mark a piece of your writing. So if you want to have a narrative marked by me and get some feedback, come join my masterclass. Thanks so much for watching today, guys, and I'll see you soon. Bye.